In October 2002, a Northwest Airlines Boeing 747 was cruising over the Bering Sea on its flight to Tokyo, Japan. The aircraft had already been en route for about 7 hours, when suddenly the aircraft started to roll to the left violently. Let's find out what happened here and afterwards. Welcome to airspace. On October 9, 2002, a Northwest Boeing 747-400 took off from Detroit for its long flight to Tokyo, Japan. The route of the day would take the 4 pilots, 14 flight attendants and 386 passengers straight over the Bering Sea for their 12-hour long-haul flight. The 747 had left the Alaskan coastline behind them about an hour ago, while flying in quite lovely weather. The flight was progressing smoothly and cruising at 35,000 feet, and it had just been time for a shift change in the cockpit. Senior Captain John Hansen and First Officer David Smith had just left the cockpit to take a rest when suddenly the 747 violently rolled to the left to about a 40-degree spank angle. Junior Captain in charge Frank Keep immediately took control and attempted to return the plane to straighten the level flight. Initially, he believed that an engine had failed, but a quick glance at the instruments revealed that all 4 engines were still perfectly healthy. After using the rudder as well as the ailerons, he managed to fly the aircraft in a straight line, but it took great strength to fly in that way. Obviously, the senior captain in the back had noticed that something was not quite right, and he returned to the flight deck, together with the first officer who was also taking a rest. The other 2 pilots in their cockpit seats explained that they had difficulties controlling the massive airliner. Senior Captain Hansen decided that, as the highest-ranking member of the crew, he would relieve the junior captain of his strenuous duty and took control himself. He quickly formed an efficient team with the 3 other pilots, and the search for the root cause of the problem began. From the instruments, it seemed clear that the lower part of the 747's rudder had deflected all the way to the left to its blowdown limit. The blowdown limit is provided by a device that limits the rudder deflection to a certain amount depending on airspeed. At cruising altitude, the deflection of the rudder is limited to avoid overloading of the rudder due to aerodynamic forces. The 747's rudder is rather special, as it is split in 2 parts, a smaller lower and a larger upper portion. These usually operate in unison, but in this case, it seemed that just the lower part had deflected all the way to its left limit, while the upper part remained under the control of the pilots. While the senior captain flew the aircraft, 2 of the other pilots rummaged through their books to find a solution to the problem, but they kept coming up empty. In the meantime, the junior captain had tried to declare an emergency, but it seemed that the 747 was just too far away from the Alaskan mainland, making radio communications impossible. Fortunately, another Northwest 747 between them and the mainland overheard their attempts at declaring mayday, and they were able to relay the message to Anchorage, the air traffic control center in charge. Using all their force, Captain Hansen and First Officer Fagan managed to turn the 747 around and set course towards Anchorage, Alaska. It would take them almost 2 hours to reach Anchorage. To ease the burden on them a bit, the crew decided to descend from 35,000 feet to 28,000 feet, where there would be a greater margin of error and a greater range of speeds to fly the 747 at. Meanwhile, the pilots of Northwest 85 had searched through all kinds of manuals and handbooks, but they were unable to find a solution to their problem. It seemed that nobody had ever experienced a problem like they had, and Boeing had not foreseen it ever happening. There was no procedure to help them prepare for landing. Further, the pilots did not know at that point if the rudder had simply malfunctioned, or if it was severely damaged. To them, it was unclear whether the rudder was just deflected or on the verge of breaking off. When the flight finally reached a point where it was able to talk to air traffic control, the pilots requested to descend to 14,000 feet to slow the aircraft down and thereby hopefully reduce the pressure on the rudder. However, air traffic control initially rejected their request, stating that there was a lot of traffic in that area. The captain, however, insisted forcefully that they were in distress and that his suggestion was the safest course of action, so air traffic control finally complied and cleared the flight to descend. But now, the hardest part still lay ahead of them, which was to actually land the aircraft. The captain was unsure how the aircraft would respond in that configuration. Additionally, the lower rudder seemed to deflect more and more as the plane slowed down, because the blowdown limit moved due to the decreasing airspeed. The rudder limit and therefore the lower rudder deflection now gradually increased from 17 degrees to 32 degrees. As the 747 approached the runway, the captain kept it steady using opposite right rudder with the upper rudder portion. This left and right rudder deflection provided a lot of drag, so more power was needed. To reduce this effect, the captain decided to use asymmetric thrust. He increased the thrust on the left engines, while he simultaneously reduced thrust on the right ones. This made the plane yaw to the right somewhat, correcting the yaw to the left, induced by the malfunctioning rudder. Finally, the 747 touched down in Anchorage, but the danger was not over. The captain was concerned that the huge airliner could veer off the runway due to the fully deflected lower rudder, so he ordered everyone on board to assume brace positions just before touchdown. Luckily, everything turned out better than he had feared. He was able to control the aircraft with a handwheel called a tiller, which controls the nose wheel directly and allows for a greater range of motion than the rudder pedals. In the end, the 747 came to a stop on the runway and was finally able to taxi to a stand under own power. On site, it was inspected immediately, and indeed, technicians found the lower rudder in the fully deflected position. It would not budge unless all hydraulic power was released from its actuators. Upon closer inspection, it was discovered that the mechanism that operates the lower rudder, called the Power Control Module or PCM, was in perfect shape. However, the manifold housing that held the PCM was fractured, allowing the module to deflect past its design stop. From that position, it could not be retracted. But how and why had the housing fractured? Investigators looked at the inspection process and found that while the power control modules were frequently inspected, their housings were not, and neither was there a requirement to inspect these housings. Metallurgical inspections revealed that the housing had fractured due to repeated motions of the power control module, leading to fatigue cracks that eventually gave way. Still, the fact that the housing fractured was surprising, as it was supposed to outlast the normal 747, never needing to be replaced. An interesting fact to note here is that the 747-400 that suffered this failure was the first of its kind that was delivered to customers. Before that, it was used by Boeing as a test aircraft. However, no link between its role as a test aircraft and the failure of the power control module housing could be established. The investigation was unable to uncover the reason behind the failure of the power control module manifold housing. However, the FAA issued an airworthiness directive that dictated that a process should be established to inspect these housings regularly using ultrasonic inspection equipment. Other than a broken PCM manifold housing, the 747 was not damaged in this incident. It was quickly repaired and returned to service. In 2009, it was repainted in a Delta Airlines livery as Northwest Airlines merged with Delta. It continued flying until it was retired in 2015, and it serves as a museum piece at the Delta Flight Museum in Atlanta. The pilots of this flight were awarded with the Superior Airmanship Award in 2004 for their great skill and crew resource management involved in saving this Boeing 747 and its passengers from a much more disastrous outcome. And that was the story of Northwest Airlines Flight 85. If you liked the video, please leave a like and consider subscribing. Also, a huge thanks to my patrons on Patreon. You guys enable and motivate me to make more and more of these videos. That said, thank you and see you all in the next one.